Hello everyone, and welcome to the webinar, The Benefits of Regional Collaboration, Workforce Development, Construction Management, and RTSMO. My name is Kevin Vita, and I'll be helping facilitate today's webinar. This webinar is hosted by the National Operations Center of Excellence, also known as NOCO. As a quick reminder, at NOCO, we offer a variety of resources to support the transportation systems management and operations community. On the bottom right side of your screen, you can see a box called Useful Links. You can browse through those links for our TSMO resources and news. Previous webinar recordings and case studies can be accessed from there. Now I'll cover a few logistics for today's webinar. We are recording this webinar, and the recording, along with the presentation slides, will be available through the on-demand learning section of NOCO's website. All the attendees' phones are in listen-only mode by default, but we'd like you to stay engaged by using the question discussion pod for comments and questions. We have a question and answer session at the end of the webinar, so if you have any questions, we encourage you all to enter them in the questions pod as they come to your mind at any time. The questions will be read out loud one at a time by the moderator, and our presenters will answer each question. So that's all I have, and with that, I'll hand it over to our moderator, Natalie Smusz-Mengelkoch. Natalie?
Great. Well, thank you, Steve. And thank you to NOCO and Nilu and Patrick for allowing us the opportunity to present today. I'm Natalie Smusz-Mengelkoch. I'm with Kimley-Horn, and I've been there for 20 years working with a primary focus on ITS and TSMO programming, planning, and design. And I'm so excited today to hear these presentations and have this discussion with you all. This idea and webinar was really born out of conversation that a group of us were having. So shout out Lisa Burgess, Jeff Dale, Kent Kaser, Tom Fowler, and Dennis Motiani. When we were discussing the importance and the impact that collaboration has and how sometimes it can be a challenge to communicate those benefits and even really to understand all of the benefits that are happening and you know, gained from collaboration. So what we did is Dennis and I reached out to a few people, and you all probably know Dennis. He knows everybody. So we were able to pull this panel together, and I think that you'll see and really be able to engage some exciting conversation. In fact, our goal today is really to be a bit informal so that we look forward to receiving your questions in the chat box and be able to have that discussion around collaboration. And so sort of the agenda today is Eddie Curtis with FHWA is going to talk to us about regional traffic signals. And Eddie is a traffic management and operations specialist with the FHWA Office of Operations and Resource Center Operations Technical Service Team. He manages the traffic signal system program, which is responsible for advancing objectives and performance-based approaches to traffic signal management and operations. And so Eddie's going to talk through some of the benefits of collaboration that he's seen through his work at FHWA. And then we're going to hear from Kate Sheeran and Ken Fink on workforce development, and then Steve Levine from TRANSCOM on construction management. And then we look forward to discussing with you your questions and thoughts around collaboration and those very important benefits that come out of there that sometimes are less tangible. And so with that, I'll turn it over to you, Eddie.
Thanks, Natalie, for that great introduction. And as I get my screen set up here, I just want to say thank you to Natalie and Dennis Montiani, who gave me a call a while back, as you mentioned, and he mentioned this topic in the webinar and asked me if I wanted to do it. And I think originally when I got the call from him, I thought he was calling to talk about how much he likes the Philadelphia Eagles, but it turns out he was really wanting to talk about the regional traffic signal or the benefits of regional collaboration. Who's that laughing in the background? So I'm going to take a little bit of an unconventional approach. So rather than doing a PowerPoint, I'm going to actually start by pointing to the FHWA Arterial Management website and focusing on our regional traffic signal operations page. This is something that we were very actively pursuing. So there's a little bit of history in terms of how this program emerged. And so I want to give the background to that, because at the core of regional traffic signal programs is this concept of collaboration. And so what I'm going to do is sort of start with an analogy. So let's talk about collaboration. This is a screenshot of Eliud Kipchoge, who holds the world record in the marathon, right? And so we all probably recognize that the marathon is probably one of the greatest tests of human endurance in the sport of running. And so it turns out that no one had been able to break the 2-hour barrier. His world record in the marathon, I think, was 2 hours and 39 seconds, something like that. And he's made multiple attempts to break this record, and it turns out that, I guess I won't give it away yet. You probably know the outcome. But I guess the question here is, could he do it alone, or would he be more successful doing this through collaboration? So what if you brought together a team of the greatest distance runners, you bring expert nutritionists, physiologists, you give them the best running technology in the world in terms of shoes, you figure out the pace, what's the right course, the right weather, wind conditions, all those things. And so through that collaboration, could that record be broken? So they had a problem that they needed to try to solve. All right, so thinking to traffic signal systems, we go back, and I said this was going to be a little bit of a history lesson. So we go back to 2005, and we had the outcome of the first traffic signal report card. And as you can see, this is on ITE's website. You can go dig this up and look through it. But the overall grade in 2005 was a D-, and there were some pretty significant issues in signal systems. So, roll ahead a couple of years, we repeat the traffic signal report card process, and we see that the grade improved to a D. That's not terribly dramatic improvement. So we see that some issues continue to persist. And this continues, but we do see some improvement when we get to 2012. And if we roll forward into the latest version of this, which is the traffic signal benchmarking and state of practice report, which was published in 2019. And here we are with the National Operations Center of Excellence and ITE involved in this. And the approach was a little bit different. But I don't necessarily want to get into the approach. What I really wanted to talk about was that things improved. And so there was certainly a problem that existed. And over this period of time, we began to explore what's really going on in signal systems? How can we dig in a little bit deeper to understand the impacts and of why agencies that are operating and maintaining traffic signals aren't doing it at the highest level that they could? And so, within Federal Highway, I work in the Resource Center and the Office of Operations, and so my colleague and I, Paul Olson, who is now retired, but still actively working in signal systems. But we wrote an article, and this article was in the ITE Journal in 2008, and it talked about traffic signal reviews, which were a follow-up to the traffic signal report card. So agencies gave us a call, and they said, hey, we got this score. We're not very happy with it. We'd like to, work with Federal Highway and others to see if there's some opportunities for improvement. So we began to do these traffic signal reviews where we took an in-depth look into traffic signal programs and how they were operating. And so what we found, and you dig down, just 3 pages in this article, you go to the 3rd page, and so you can see we've got sort of a list of our key lessons. And what we found were, most agencies were very committed to operating and maintaining their signal systems, but often they were doing it in a very ad hoc manner. They lacked resources. It was difficult to retain staff. Many of the smaller jurisdictions did not have the staff that they needed. And they certainly did not have, from a financial perspective, the level of resources that was really required. And so this article comes out in 2008. And one of the things we noticed when we get to the 2007 report card is we looked into that data and we saw some highlights of agencies that have made some significant improvements from 2005 to 2007. And we noticed that a number of those agencies were within what we called regional traffic signal programs. And at the time, they weren't really called that. They were just organizations that were in regions where maybe they had a regular meeting of, a technical panel, or there was some regular training, or the MPO was involved, and they were helping to, write justifications for improvements that potentially spanned multiple jurisdictions. And so what we did in 2008 was we decided, hey, let's look at this in a little bit more detail. So we funded a small study, and it looked at regional traffic signal operations programs. And what we found, when we peered into several of these programs, and here's a list of them on page 5 of that document, so it's Colorado, Nevada, Arizona, and several others. And what we found from those organizations was that we saw some collaborative activities, and what we found were that they were beginning to share resources. They talked about how to use limited resources more effectively together. They began writing documents that sort of cast a direction and vision for the region. They were sharing equipment. We saw systems being integrated, and we even saw jurisdictional boundaries that typically were these huge barriers between, state DOTs and local agencies. But we saw a lot of those things beginning to be dissolved, and a lot or much improved approach to signal operations. So we documented that in this study, and we still felt like we needed to know a little bit more about this. And so at the time, both Paul and I actually were in the TRB Signal Systems Committee. And at that time, because I got more interested in these regional approaches, I actually started to be a friend of the RTSMO committee in TRB. And it was there that we wrote a research problem statement that actually ended up turning into a synthesis study that started, I think, around 2009. And in 2011, this synthesis study was documented, but it was focused on operational and institutional agreements that facilitate regional signal operations, because the thought was, if we could look at these agencies and figure out, well, how did they start this collaboration? How did they stand this program up? Well, we could document those things and share them, and other regions could take that as a template and maybe start up a regional signal program and begin to see some of the same types of benefits. But turns out that there was so much more to learn about this, so that synthesis study was completed, and it only spawned the need to sort of dig a little bit deeper. So around 2010, this one's done, we proposed another research problem, and that ends up turning into this, what they call the reverse scan. It was part of the SCAN program with NCHRP, and this documented best practices in regional multi-agency traffic operations management. And this was a really interesting study. We had about 15 agencies involved. Here's a list of them. You can find that in the table of contents, and of course there's a chapter that talks about each of these programs in detail. And I think what I'll do is probably highlight a few of them, because I think there were some real standouts, and we found that they were engaged in some really interesting activities. And one of the key among them was the development of these, really from a planning perspective, describing what traffic signal programs could accomplish, if they had improved staff, improved resources, could provide better maintenance. But that was described from this, goals and objectives perspective. And so we found that, documenting what you're trying to accomplish results in improvements, tangible improvements. And we also saw things in terms of funding. We saw, improved coordinated operations, so regional signal systems began to emerge. We saw multi-jurisdictional collaboration, things like minimum controller standards and procurement of signal controllers, but these were all things that were identified. And an interesting, it's a great outcome, but something that we didn't anticipate. If you think about all the agencies that were involved and all the people that were engaged, these were people that were collaborating, within their own regions. But when you bring these type of folks together, what we saw is we started to see collaboration, not just within regions, but really across the country. So, Georgia's collaborating with Utah. Utah's collaborating with Indiana. Nevada and Missouri are collaborating. And so it really just, it sort of fed, and so this culture of collaboration just grew. And so now, roll forward to today, and you start to look into some of these agencies, and some of them had some really, things that motivated a lot of their improvements. So Utah, back in, this might have been around 2008, 2009, their commissioner at the time suggested that, what he wanted to see in Utah was a world-class signal operation. And so some very operative champions took that on. They wrote a document. It was the quality improvement document. It talked about all the things that needed to happen in Utah to sort of reach this world class of signal operations. And so Utah now is actually probably the leader in the country in terms of automated signal performance measures. They helped stand up an open source version of that software. It's been absorbed by a number of agencies that are also using it. GDOT, I think, now has one of the largest deployments of ATSPM in the country. But, I mean, it just sort of shows the power of this collaboration. Another good example is Dr. Cog in Denver. And they have this regional traffic operations program. And it's been around for, probably a couple of decades now. And what this program has done, maybe one of the key things, is their traffic signal improvement program, which provides capital funding to, upgrade equipment, install communications links, and provide signal timing services across the region to all of the local agencies and the state DOT. And they do a great job of documenting what they're accomplishing. You can see all these reports that are there. And they've done a fair amount of outreach and marketing to discuss the benefits of that program. And then another great example, I think, is the Metropolitan Transportation Commission in the Bay Area. And this was a really interesting approach where they started with really like a technical discussion. So they'd have these technology transfer program where they would host free half-day workshops, and people in the region sort of come together and they discuss various technical topics. And we were actually able to participate in these discussions, and we brought in things like adaptive control. We talked about automated signal performance measures. And the folks in the region at the MPO, MTC, put together this idea innovative deployments to enhance arterials, and it provided $13 million in grant funding, which agencies within the region were able to compete for, and they awarded, I think it was down here somewhere, it was 10 projects, and then there was a couple of different categories, but so these agencies within the region were able to receive this funding to implement new technologies, and a lot of it was adaptive or ATSPM related projects. And then I guess the last example I'll talk about is Aztec. This one's in Phoenix. And I think one of the really interesting things about this region, and all these regions tend to focus on different things. You know, they all have specific problems. But this region implemented a regional community network, which is a region-wide communication system that all of the agencies are able to leverage, you know, for signal systems and exchange of information. And ASTEC's also really good at writing reports and, you know, planning documents to talk about implementation of technology over the long term. And they've been fortunate to receive one of FHWA's ATC MTD grants, and so they're implementing an ICM corridor in and around Phoenix. That, you know, it's amazing what they're able to do as an outcome of this collaboration. And just to sort of continue, you know, I talked about adaptive control and ATSPM. Well, it turns out that these regional programs are also great conduits for technology and innovation. So when we have a new technology initiative within Federal Highway, we look for these, you know, these coalitions because it's much easier to go in and know that there's going to be a technical panel meeting or a forum that's going to happen on a regular basis where we can come in and talk about these new technologies, and we know that there's a pathway to get these things implemented. So that's just another benefit of collaboration, and this just shows the map of ATSPM. This was back in 2018, and the darker colors on the map are the ones that were implementing ATSPM or trying to institutionalize that technology. And you could see if you compared a map of these regional programs to where the darker states are, you would see that there's a lot of overlap between those. And so that sort of brings me to the end of this. And I'm going to go back to my analogy with Elliot Kipchoge. He was able to break the marathon record of 2 hours. It actually is not considered to be the official world record because it was done collaboratively. So you had pacers. You know, you saw that first picture where they sort of shielded him from the wind, and they provided this pace for him, and I think the average pace for that was like 4 minutes and 32 seconds for each mile. So it's pretty incredible. But it just demonstrates what can be accomplished through collaboration. And as I said, everything that I talked about today is all on the FHWA website. I think we put a link in the chat pod, and so that's available to you if you wanted to learn more about anything that I talked about. And so that wraps it up for me. My contact information is here, and I guess next we're going to hear from Kate and Ken. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Eddie. And so as Eddie mentioned, Kate and Ken are going to pull up their slides now, and Kate Sharon is the Metro Atlanta Signal Operations Engineer in the GDOT Office of Traffic Operations. She is currently managing the Georgia RTOP program. In this role, she is establishing a statewide traffic signal operations program covering the entirety of Georgia, which is possible through the deployment of new traffic signal software and communications. And then Ken Fink has worked with Kimley-Horn over 27 years with a primary focus within traffic operations and ITS. He has been a project manager for GDOT's Regional Traffic Operations Program for the past decades. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, Natalie. So like Natalie said, Ken and I are going to split up this next presentation to discuss the case study in Georgia. And we're going to focus specifically on the signal active management aspect that is SIGOPS, which is our new branding for the RTOP program and all of that we are doing in Georgia with signals. So I'm going to go through a really brief history, then we'll talk about how the program has evolved, and then Ken will walk through several things that have remained consistent and how those have been the keys to success in this program. So active management of traffic signals in Georgia began about 10 years ago when the idea of regional traffic operations programs, RTOP, was introduced, and this was to improve operations along regionally significant corridors in the metro Atlanta area. Specifically, this program combined a lot of the separate signal and maintenance contracts that we had all under one umbrella and helped us coordinate the goals between the many stakeholders and jurisdictions along these corridors. Over the next decade, the program would expand and restructure to include more corridors in the metro Atlanta area And then in 2017, we established some contracts that put in place to provide active management on a statewide level in order to support the over 9,000 signalized intersections that Georgia has, as well as to coordinate with the over 100 local jurisdictions that we have. In 2020, GDOT unveiled a new program, SIGOPS, which combined all of the previous programs under one umbrella and established a new consistent and cohesive statewide active management program for all the signals. One of the biggest things that's changed over the past decade is the scale of this program. In the first RTOP contract, there were only 396 intersections, which ran along 10 corridors. And in the last round of the RTOP contracts, over 1,700 intersections were included in this contract. These were all in the metro area. Now under the statewide SIGOPS program, the entire state is eligible for GDOT resources to monitor and manage signal operations. And currently there are over 8,000 intersections that are supported by this program. In order to manage such a large program, GDOT has divided the state up into 6 regions, and we'll have 2 statewide contracts to support communications as well as the software that GDOT utilizes for this program. So we've gone from one contract, that initial RTOP contract with 396 intersections, to in 2021 we will have 8 contracts just supporting signal operations. And those 8 contracts are really to help internal staff manage this program, as well as to create consistent point of contacts and make sure that we can scale up to this level of signal active management in a way that's manageable. Back in 2011, RTOP started with dedicated funding of $8 million. The program has obviously been successful since we've expanded the boundaries from the metro Atlanta area statewide, and GDOT has supported that expansion with additional dedicated funding. We're now up to about $30 million just for operations. The approach and vision of this program has also significantly changed over the years. We've gone from a corridor-based model, which really focused on increasing travel throughput on those corridors, which sometimes negatively affected the side streets, to a regional-based model, which takes into account all of the different goals of stakeholders, as well as proactively managing traffic to balance any negative impacts in that area. The monitoring has also changed significantly from mostly field monitoring and directing corridor managers to be present on their corridors. So now we rely a lot more on central and remote monitoring. This is really necessary for us to be able to cover the number of intersections that we have included in this program, as well as to have consistent quality engineers working across the state. Since most of the engineers in Atlanta live, or in Georgia, live in the metro Atlanta area, and we want to provide a consistent feel across the whole state. Technology improvements have been essential to being able to scale up and to transition to a central and remote monitoring approach. 10 years ago, none of the signals communicated back to GDOT, none collected high-resolution data, and we didn't really have any arterial CCTV coverage. Today, we've got 6,700 intersections communicating back to GDOT central server, and a lot more that are connecting back to some local servers for jurisdictions that have a more robust operations program themselves. And we've deployed over 1,000 arterial traffic monitoring cameras so that we don't have to go out into the field to diagnose issues, that we get a chance to look at what's going on and get eyes on the ground before we send out resources, in case we're able to avoid that just by observing something on a camera. A couple of years ago, GDOT did a mass statewide deployment to upgrade all of our traffic signal controllers to collect high-resolution data. This technology has now been deployed at over 7,000 intersections in Georgia. And a final major change has been how performance is evaluated. We've really moved away from just doing travel runs along corridors to utilizing all that ATSPM data, which is made possible by that high-resolution data deployment that we did. So that's a quick summary of a lot of the changes that we've done over the years. Now I'm going to hand it over to Ken to talk about things that have been consistent throughout this evolution and why those aspects are critical to the success in the future.
Thanks, Kate. And you know, it's amazing how far it's come. And so the question is, what fueled it? You know, how did it get there? And these are kind of the things that we've looked at. You know, moving an umbrella of TRANSCOM operations to kind of collect those projects together, as Kate mentioned, was really a founding starting thing to allow us to focus. And then the collaboration with others, innovation through technology, and the flexibility of how we manage the contracts. And we'll go through all those, but they kind of all feed one another. So the robust maintenance program. As you can see, that old controller up in the corner, that's kind of where we started in some situations. That actually was a controller that was controlling an interchange on I-85 at the very beginning parts of the program. And the lower picture there, we affectionately call that Captain Andy. That's a Kimley-Horn employee. We used to use that in almost every single signal timing program or proposal that we did, but we don't anymore because that's not how we do it. You know, he's out there with the laptop and a 9-pin connector watching. Now we're doing a lot more of it remote, and we've got trained people on multiple teams that are coming in that have developed specialty areas. So one of the things that was done through GDOT was this menu of services contract. So it allowed us to be a lot more flexible on how we deliver the program, and we'll get into some of that. On-call requests were developed. So what the on-call requests became were the teams working under RTSO or RTOP have basically a menu item of various maintenance tasks that contractors have pre-bid on. And so if they've got something in the field, so let's say there's a pedestrian head knocked down and they need to have the head reestablished, new wire run out to it, they'll take that menu of items, create an on-call request, and it's then put out to contractors, selected contractors who've already pre-bid, to say whether they're available and whether they can do it. And that turnaround on that is a lot faster, and then we manage that internal to the program as opposed to waiting for these things. Quick response OCRs were developed from that, and that is essentially a pot of money that we need something now. We've got a comm break, we've got something that is down, we can issue those right then and there, and then utilize those funds to then pay those contractors who are able to respond quickly. Partnering with local agencies, GDOT has the maintenance money associated with the contract kind of separate from where the consultant money is. And so if the maintaining agencies have their own forces to install equipment and they have a project, let's say they want to install a flashing yellow arrow at a particular intersection, GDOT can supply them with that equipment through those maintenance funds for their maintaining agencies to install. And then while that's done, that's helped managed by the program. Dedicated maintenance staff, we've kind of hit on that. It allows those groups to be focused and dedicated because the program encompasses so much that they can have a dedicated staff to it. And then the specialty skill sets developed. And this is a big one, and I'll continue to talk about it. As these things have developed and more people have had the opportunity to work in the field and get plugged into these type of things, you start to see within the workforce more and more specialty skills relative to traffic signals, maintenance, management, and operations being developed. So collaboration is key, and it has been the whole time through. In the early stages, prior to the RTOP program, as Kate mentioned, there weren't any traffic signals that came back to a central location in the GDOT TMC. Some of the local agencies had some, but in the GDOT TMC there weren't any. And now there's 8,000 that come back. And as we started the program, all those maintaining agencies kind of did their own thing. You know, you would cross a county line, and one county line would be doing a timing program that was this year, and then 4 years later, the rest of the corridor might be timed by the maintaining agency that was on the other end of the county line. As we started in the program, there was a little bit of hesitation from some of those maintaining agencies to say, okay, well, are you all going to come in and just kind of wide open the main line, and our side streets are going to, you know, die, and how are we going to handle our constituents? But as it evolved and as that trust built with the local maintaining agencies, and we developed memorandums of understanding with those local maintaining agencies for what RTOP would do and what the maintaining agency would do, it became a benefit to them. They started seeing, okay, well, these are some of my worst corridors. You all are handling it. It is a help to us, and we can work together on it. And when we started leveraging that with the maintenance money and making that available to get new equipment installed, new cameras installed, whether we were doing it as part of the program or whether we were providing that equipment to the maintaining agency so they could even do it faster, continued to build that collaboration and that trust and help to get this deployment moving as fast as it did. And then, there's these side benefits. I mean, working together during events and emergency management, all these agencies, whether it's, the local maintaining agency, but then you get like a sports venue, police, emergency services. A real good example of that is, and I'm sure most of you have heard the story about how we had the bridge collapse here in Atlanta. Well, some of the backside of that story that isn't told very often is RTOP was in place at that point. And that night when my phone started lighting up, turn on the TV and, call me. I got phone calls from GDOT. I was on the phone with my entire team. But I also got phone calls from 2 local municipalities that said, hey, what can we do to help? We've called GDOT. We know they're busy. What do you need in the morning type thing? And so it becomes that collaborative effort of everybody working together. And then these last 3 bullets are things that are also benefits, and we're still seeing and I think developing the benefits of them. And that's working in coordination with the construction offices within GDOT and maintaining agencies so that, okay, there's this project coming through that's going to rip out every single loop. Has it been coordinated with this other program over here? And that's, that is something that we continue to work on and continue to develop, but that didn't really exist a lot of times before. Coordination between all SIGOPS contracts. Kate mentioned that ultimately there's going to be 8 of them. What we have seen is between those consulting teams, a tremendous sharing of information and sharing of technology, sharing of knowledge. All the teams overlap in so many ways that as a community of consultants, it's become this great coordination effort, and those contracts then work together a lot better. And then coordination with other programs. So GDOT has, safety programs. They have other types of programs that kind of overlap here, roundabout programs, those kind of things. Understanding okay, there's a safety project being done. That particular intersection is an intersection that's in a corridor that's currently managed by one of the RTOP programs. They've got a lot of information on it. They know a lot about it. How can they help with the safety analysis that's being done there? And then, conversely, you've got this RTSO signal or this RTOP signal that's out there, and the people that are working on those contracts see a need for a safety study, or they see a need for an operational improvement study. They then suggest those to those other programs, and they fuel each other. It allows for flexibility, and this is really just a continued dynamic of the program. So I have 3 little funny pictures here, and the first picture is really not Lance, but the other 2 pictures are Lance. And so, where we used to be in the field having to do timings with stopwatches, then kind of changed to where we had central locations, and then changed to where we even have remote desktop people working from home now, right? Doing a lot of it. And the contracting mechanism really allowed us to continue to be flexible with that. One of the things that was done was with the menu of services contract, we could say, okay, we need to specifically look at this set of things for a certain amount of time. And that really allowed that additional flexibility, working within different consultant team structures. So as the program started, Kate mentioned you had a lot of people that were spending a lot of time in the field. Then they started developing the innovation, started getting us all that data back to where we could do more from a central location, and then from even more remote locations. And the internal GDOT staff organization changed as well to address that. I think, Kate, if I can quote me later on the numbers, but I think there was something like 5 or 6 people in the staff, and now there's over 20 or 30 in the GDOT staff that helps to manage this program. And all those groups continue to develop these new set of skills and these new things. One of the reasons I use Lance here is Lance is a really good example. Lance actually in Austin now. He was under this program for 4 or 5 years, there was a program starting up in Austin. They needed somebody with his particular skill set, and we were like, hey, we've got a guy, Kimley-Horn. We've got a guy that can help with that. And so now Lance is out doing this in Austin and starting to spread that out to other places. And innovation leads to innovation. And I left this in there, that title in there, particularly to annoy Natalie because she hated that title when I said this, when I presented to her. So you're welcome, Natalie. But really, it's very interesting when you start to think about the fact that early on, nothing was communicating back. And so then we started getting communications back. Okay, so we can do remote time. Okay, now we have communications. We have better detection out there. We can start to do traffic responsive. Now we're starting to get really good data back, and we can start to do ATSPM, some remote monitoring, some other things. Okay, now that we've got those set up, we can stand up our own websites that consolidate that information, which is now our SIGOPS website, and those can then be used to develop new things. And oh, now that we've got all these people looking at it that have developed these new skill sets, these smart young folks are looking at it and saying, hey, I really wish it could do this. And so then all of a sudden we see new applications developed. We see new metrics developed. The left turn gap analysis that's now part of UDOT's ATSPM came out of this program as one of our field folks saying, hey, this would be an interesting thing to do. And GDOT looking at it and say, yeah, why don't we look at developing that? And so those kind of innovations keep building upon themselves, and those individual skill sets keep getting grown and grown and grown. And so workforce development is where it all ends, and what, I think is part of our theme is that all of the different areas that work within the TSMO world, of everything from emergency services to private sector consultants, vendors, have all benefited from the workforce development that has come out of this. You've got folks that have developed niche specialty areas in safety and performance metrics. You have folks that are in a maintenance side, have developed unique skill sets, and all of that information is continually being shared, and that collaboration continues to fuel all of them. And we, one of our folks is recently working on a safety metric that looks at the speed associated with crash severity and how we can look at, do we need to time signals differently based on what the crash potential severity for a pedestrian or a bicyclist is. Just unique items that continue to develop as the program continues to develop and spread. And with that, I think that is my last slide. And Natalie, back to you for Steve.
Great. Thanks, Kate. Thanks, Ken. So now we have Steve Levine. Steve is the Executive Director of TRANSCOM. Prior to joining TRANSCOM, he had a diverse mix of public and private sector transportation experiences. His prior experience includes serving as the EasyPass New York Program Manager at Conduit and senior consulting positions at Jacobs Engineering Group, Kimley-Horn, and TransCore. In addition, Steve worked for 13 years with TxDOT in the Houston District Office. Thanks, Steve.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Natalie and Dennis, for the opportunity to make a presentation today on our the role that TRANSCOM plays in regional construction collaboration and coordination. So what I'm going to focus on this afternoon is just to provide a little bit about an overview of the organizations, our mission, our function, a little bit about our governance, and then talk a little bit on what we do about regional construction coordination. And I will want to say that the original premise that TRANSCOM was organized for was the first purpose was regional construction coordination. And so it's very timely that we show where we have progressed to as we've gotten more involved, both from an institutional standpoint and a technological standpoint. And I'll show examples of each of those as I proceed. So just a little bit an overview of the region. TRANSCOM does not control anything. We coordinate, we facilitate, we collaborate We help leverage agency resources, but the agencies maintain their operations on their own jurisdiction. This is a unique metropolitan area in that we have, hopefully we have close to 24 million. Unfortunately, with recent events, probably some of the area has slightly less than that. We try to leverage technology for member agencies, and we foster collaboration and cooperation. Our member agencies, we are across 3 states, New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. We're multimodal, and as you can see, when I bring that up, you have both PATH and New York City Transit, as well as New Jersey Transit, and we're multidisciplinary, as you can see, New Jersey State Police, New York State Police, and New York City Police. This is our mission statement. The primary takeaway here is we are 24/7, 365. I don't know where some of you all are today. We have a little bit of a, I would say relatively, it's a snow event, and so that's part of one of our functions is to coordinate events like this. Just to put some quantification of the amount of information that we put on some of our systems, there's about a little over 450,000 events that our systems that are entered in by our member agencies or ourselves that go on throughout the year, and about 24 a day turn out to be require regional coordination. From the organizational history, the organization started as an offshoot of the Port Authority, New York and New Jersey in 1986. And then in 1999, it became a 501c3. We are run by our member agencies. We have a board of directors of representatives from our 16 member agencies, and we have an elected chair who is one of the representatives of the member agencies. And the 501c3 allows us to function, from in a coordinated way and in a very good governance that allows us to proceed. Now, the little premise that I've used, this is a little dated in this slide, but it does show the way things originated. This before TRANSCOM, and these cones are showing some construction projects. What's interesting here is you have 3 crossings: Holland Tunnel, Lincoln Tunnel, and the George Washington Bridge. Each facility here is under this scenario that existed. New Jersey DOT has jurisdiction for the road approaching the Lincoln Tunnel, New Jersey 495. In this example, Port Authority had work planned on the Lincoln Tunnel, and then New York State DOT had work planned on the Cross Bronx Expressway in the eastbound, and all 3 of these projects were in eastbound direction, inbound in New York City, and each of these roads are alternate routes to the other, and under this example, we're showing that they're run by 3 different agencies, and they would have impacted one direction in the region. So, the premise was by communication, collaboration, we were able to adjust the scheduling of this work, and one agency proceeded with their work. In this case, the Port Authority, New York and New Jersey. New Jersey worked on the opposite direction, and New York State DOT worked on a different facility for that particular day. And now we've migrated to where regional construction, collaboration, coordination in our functions is part of our strategic plan. And these are just this page is actually taken from our strategic plan, and a lot of our focus is in the rest of my presentation will be on 1.1.2 and 1.1.3 and how we implement regional construction coordination institutionally and technologically. We have a full-time regional and special event coordinator, and there's a lot of activities that he participates in, and these are meetings on a frequent basis that he attends, and you can see that these are meetings whether they're run by our member agencies. The first one is one that occurs every 2 weeks to respond to a lot of the construction work that is being done within the adjacent to within New York City, and as well as some of the crossings. That is being run jointly by New York State DOT and MTA, and it occurs every 2 weeks. New Jersey DOT has a weekly construction coordinating meeting, as does the Port Authority. I'll show some examples of the Restore 495 project that also has meetings, and then periodically New York State DOT might have field meetings. Our construction coordinator participates in this, and in some cases, because of his background and his experience and knowledge, can represent an agency that might not be there and offer some perspectives on potential conflicts that might occur with some of the other work that is scheduled. Now, these are meetings that he leads, and these are meetings that sometimes once a year. In the case of the yearly construction coordination meetings, some are done on a weekly basis, some are done on a monthly basis. And again, with the purposes of trying to bring all the agencies together, and as you saw in the example at the outset, so that we coordinate the progress of the work and try to minimize conflicts. Some of our systems and now I'm going to shift from the institutional side to the technical side. From a standpoint of systems, these are our systems and tools that we use to help with the construction coordination and also manage some of the events. T-REX is our new data entry system, and unfortunately that's what happens when you have engineers or systems people come up with names of systems. But T-REX is our data entry system that we instituted late last year, and this is our first full year of operation. It allows us to, and that's shared by our member agencies, and it's a data entry system so that all of our events that occur within our region is housed in that system. Our time system is using the pro-based surveillance technology based on easy pass penetration within the region, providing us with travel times on about 300 miles within our region. And then we have a data fusion engine and spattle tools, which the fusion engine is taking different data from our member agencies, third-party data, the time system, and aggregating that, and then allowing the spattle tool to provide some analysis that gives us the travel times on particular links, brings in the cameras from the member agencies, archives the information for analysis. We've added a weather layer. We're bringing in some weather information. Some of the agency anemometers, particularly the toll agencies, have at their crossings, and we share that information with our member agencies as well as some other local municipalities and universities. We've developed a regional construction tool, and this tool is being used to provide some advancement from where we were before. Before, it was more of a access database where we cataloged all of the agency construction projects, and in that yearly meeting where we go over the annual construction programs of the respective member agencies, that became a pretty cumbersome activity. The construction tool allows this to be done in a more organized format. It does interface into our T-REX system, so if an agency wants to use this on a more advanced planning and then it's progressing into implementation, there's an ability to have the interface into T-REX. It also can be used as a planning tool to provide agencies an example of what might be conflicting versus the near term or the long term. Some examples on how it would be used. In this particular case, the area graphic is a 5-mile radius, and it identified all the potential projects that have schedules for a particular weekend of February 5th through February 7th, understanding that the conflicts are not always in the same direction based. Potentially, there could be a road closure on an east-west road that would divert traffic to a north-south road. The atypical conflict is the same direction parallel roads, but the less typical could be a more severe consequence. As such, this tool primarily focuses on projects scheduled to occur during the same time frames. Another example where the user then can select the associated projects and review all the potential conflicts individually. We're using these tools for multiple agency projects in the Bronx, some of the work that's being done by the Port Authority due to Hurricane Sandy, other projects in Queens on the Van Wyck Expressway, and then down the road we look at some future work that is going to be done on the BQE corridor. We also support member agencies with the use of our systems and tools. This is some work that we're doing to support New Jersey DOT in their Restore 495 project. Again, this was providing them, aggregating information from a variety of sources. This parallelogram provides an ability to take a snapshot of the work and also the parallel routes and allow access by the operators to monitor work that's going on that particular corridor, and using the different systems that the agencies have put into play, and then the analytical tool that we have created that allows us, the agencies, to monitor the impacts of the project and on traffic. This is an example of how the output would look for the operator, and also how someone from the public could also view this information as well on the Restore 495 website, providing information on different links and travel times. And then lastly, this is some work that is being done by New York State DOT and MTA to support some of the work that the agencies are collaborating on, where their jurisdictional work abuts each other, and so they're trying to coordinate where the diversion of traffic and the modeling of this. And in this particular case, we would be using our data to support their model. You can see our logo is in there, and this is just the outlier, their frame of their model that their consultant is developing and is in the process of calibrating right now for presentation at a future date to the agencies. So with that, I'll stop and say thank you and turn it back over to Natalie.
Great, thank you, Steve. So now is the time for you all to input your questions in the chat box, and we would be excited to take those questions and discuss that. We do have a few sort of potential questions to work through as well, so I'll go ahead and throw one or two out to the group so that y'all can put in the chat. I would ask you, as you're typing your question in, if you don't mind, industry acronyms are fine. However, like the texting cool talk and stuff, I'm too old to get all of that. So for me, FYI means flashing yellow arrow, not for your awareness. So help me out, y'all. All right. So to our panel, I'll just throw one out there for y'all. Wanting to kind of think through how COVID-19 has impacted these collaborative processes, and just kind of throw that out to the group, and if anybody wants to take the lead on responding to that.
Well, do somebody else start? We'll all start. I'll be third. I'll take the third.
I'd say in Georgia, our program shifted very seamlessly to being remote. Luckily, we had spent the last few years really setting up the communication between traffic signals, and we had relationships established with a lot of local jurisdictions. So it was just a matter of moving in-person meetings to virtual meetings like what we're doing here, as well as moving our staff that usually sat together monitoring traffic on their computers to being in remote locations and then communicating via the internet and calls. So that was very easy transition for us, and we actually haven't seen a drop in the service that we provide on a statewide level. There were some hiccups right at the beginning of just making sure that we have the right number of people looking at the right things, especially when traffic changed so much and we had to implement new plans with the lower traffic volumes. But overall, the COVID did not negatively impact us here in Georgia too much.
Great. Ken, did you have something you wanted to share?
Sure. So I'll echo what Kate said. We do have folks still that do some maintenance operations in the field and that kind of stuff. I think what has been set up has allowed us to be very specific about what we're doing, making sure that that's being done in a safe way. We're not having to, as Kate indicated in her presentation, we don't have people that are constantly in the field now like they used to be. They can kind of diagnose and do a lot more diagnostics from a remote location. In a similar fashion, I just think it's an interesting story, the impact of COVID on the 511 system here in Georgia. When everybody kind of left the TMC for COVID, they had to kind of scramble to get those operators all laptops because they were all workstation based. So when GDOT re-advertised the new 511 contract, which came out during COVID, part of that advertisement was that the contractor, which is a consultant, on-call consultant, had to provide their staff with laptops in case there's some sort of emergency or in case of a shutdown such as we had. So those kind of things help us to prepare and be ready for the future as well.
Awesome. Any others on the bandwagon?
Sure. I'd just say that from COVID standpoint, there's a couple of observations. One is obviously we're all using Adobe Connect today, so the virtual world is a medium that we've had all of our in-person meetings now have been replaced obviously virtually. And then I would say that a lot of the agencies, I'm sure across the country, but in this particular region, increased some of their hours during COVID to finish some of their projects because at the times of the lower volumes, especially during the initial phases of different levels of shutdowns. And I think that's an important one. And when some of those work was going on, obviously we would try to sync that up where agencies were doing work so that the motorist would be informed of adjacent work that might be done in adjacent jurisdictions.
Great.
If I can add one more thing, Natalie, from an operational perspective, what it allowed us to do. So we were able to utilize our ATSPM data to really adjust on the fly relative to those drop in volumes that we saw. And one of the things that we saw, very interesting, was our existing traffic responsive in a lot of areas actually started to bottom out, meaning that it just wanted to select the lowest plan. And what we found was we could develop even lower plans because we did never expect that big of a drop in traffic. So through being our remote monitoring and our performance metrics, we've been able to step plans within traffic responsive and other timing plans to adjust on a continual basis for how that volume is coming back and how it went up and down. So just, more of those advanced skill sets, things that people have developed in the remote operational side of it that's allowed us to do that.
Great. It looks like we do have a question in the chat here from Greg. For the GDOT program, do the local agencies specifically contribute financially to the program?
No. The local agencies are extremely different across the state. Some have very robust programs that are well funded and they have staff dedicated to signal operations. Others barely maintain theirs, and they've got some contracts with utility companies to maintain the traffic signals. So our program provides resources fully funded by GDOT that kind of steps into what needs there are with that agency and fills in that gap so that we provide a consistent experience across Georgia.
Great.
I might be able to add a little something to that, and maybe not specifically for GDOT, because I think what I learned in some of our regional signal operations reviews and information that we collected was that states and MPOs and the way that they distribute federal funds are all a little bit different. And GDOT is a state that I would characterize as one with a very strong state DOT, and MPOs, I wouldn't say that they're weak MPOs, but the way that the money flows is that the state sort of gets to take a lot off of the top, where if I contrasted that with California, California is a place where I would say the state DOT is relatively weak in terms of how it's able to, I guess, identify or distribute funding. So the state DOTs and MPOs and local agencies almost all have an equal standing in how federal funds are distributed. So I think GDOT had a very unique situation. I think it's one of the reasons they're able to stand up their program so quickly and fund it so aggressively, is that the state has a lot of latitude over how those funds are distributed. And that's not always the case in a lot of states, so it really depends on your, specific configuration in your state.
Interesting. So kind of along those lines, I have another question. To the point of being able to encourage additional funding to support some of these kind of collaborative strategies, how have you all, and this is a question for everybody, how have you all seen or been able to share and demonstrate and communicate those less tangible benefits of collaboration with stakeholders and decision makers to be able to maintain and gain additional support? What sort of works? And I think this is kind of a tricky spot. Like how do you how do you communicate that?
I guess I could jump in on this one. For one, I think the approach we've taken in Federal Highway is to highlight how individual programs promote themselves. And so if you go to that page that I dropped in the chat box and you go to regional programs, there's a link for outreach. And so some of these programs have created brochures, they've got their different reports that they put out. But I think the actual collaboration, going back to my analogy with the marathon, only one person crosses that finish line. And so I think you don't always see the collaboration. You see the outcome, which is the final coordination. It's a new communication system. It's better regionally developed signal timing plans, and better systems, the ability to implement ATSPM or some adaptive system, or better work zone management. It's really difficult sometimes to really see the collaborative activities that contributed to that. So you sort of have to look at those outcomes and really look at that whole program in its entire context to really understand the benefits of that collaboration.
I'd have to agree with Eddie on that. And one of the things that we've really noticed that really isn't a tangible or like numerical benefit is that this program has really become a liaisonship between different offices in GDOT as well as the local jurisdictions. Just from GDOT down to the local jurisdictions, we've kind of created that communication stream. And upper management of GDOT as well as the local jurisdictions, the higher up people they're seeing the benefits in terms of we're not overlapping efforts. We're not seeing a maintenance crew go out and do something that a project is about to come down from another group to do. So we're kind of collecting all that information inside of this program and distributing it so that everything works a little bit better together. We're also seeing a lot of people come to us now as opposed to us going to them trying to get information. Like they understand that we are kind of that collector of all the information and that communication stream. And so it's become more ingrained in the day-to-day mechanisms that how GDOT operates as well as how the locals operate.
Natalie, on that collaboration from a workforce development standpoint, one of the things I've seen, I think, that helps build that trust is there's just been this cross-training that has happened through the program where, we've done specific signal timing training in certain districts. We've had folks that have been sitting in a local municipality, TMC, set up their MaxView server for them and how that's supposed to work. We've had people that are specialists within traffic responsive go into a municipality and train their folks on how we've got our set up, and then they've come back and said we kind of like it this way, and we adapt some of their protocols, and so there's just been this cross training, and that staff then that some of that staff that's developed in the private sector world suddenly finds themselves opportunities in the public sector world to help maintain and manage some of these things as well. So there's been that cross-pollination of staff as people just move locations. So that's been a very big benefit too, and the relationships have just been fantastic. It's just and Natalie, you had commented on it about your experience in other states, and there just doesn't seem to be a lot of arguing or competition even in the consultant world. Everybody seems to be working together, on the programs pretty well.
Yeah, I agree. I wonder, Steve, do you sense that as well through, I guess, sort of the creation of a collaborative strategy to, kind of problem solve? Then, as Kim kind of said, like everybody working together, you sort of lose sure, everybody's still competitive. I don't mean to make it sound like super rosy, but like, for example, I have, a whole host of other consultants in my phone, and, in a way that I didn't have before I was within this area. Is that similar to what you're seeing as well?
Oh, certainly collaboration. And then there's opportunities where, you wind up, the best way is probably, like teamwork, where you work with your member agencies. I mean, there was I was actually searching while we were talking, where there was some Con Ed mutual aid crews that needed to get to New York City, the storm that took place on February 1st, and we're working with New York City Office of Emergency Management, who's also working with the PEMA, to get those crews because they're backed up, and so to identify where they are. So yeah, everybody, especially with what is going on, is all trying to help each other.
And I guess not that this would ever happen anywhere, but what happens when? Have you all run into any problems when people are not working together well, and sort of any lessons learned that you can share with the group?
That's a setup. Yes, sorry.
It really wasn't a setup, but
I'll comment on that. I won't call any place out, but I think one of the things that I see to contrast places that don't have good collaboration versus those that do, I think when there's a really strong, effective champion that bring people together and help them understand how much they can gain by working together. And a lot of this goes to funding, because if you can't, the way that funding's distributed, it could be relatively competitive. So if you've got local agencies all competing against each other for this very limited pot of funding, when you have somebody that shows up and says, hey, I think there's a way that we could probably get more funding and find a way to meet everyone's needs, across the region if we do this more strategically. And I think that that's what I've seen consistently across regions where I see a lot of benefit. And I think places that tend to maintain that very competitive nature to funding don't see the type of gains that you see in other regions.
Interesting. And so
now,
Dennis, yep.
Okay, sorry, I'm slow on the mute. So
go for it.
An interesting thing that early in the program, one of the concerns that I saw coming out of some of the maintaining agencies was almost the reverse of what Eddie was saying, which was this program was going to take funding away from them. So, you have maintaining agencies who are, some of them, struggling to be able to maintain all their signals. They need to do, X plus Z, but they can only get to X GDOT comes in and says, well, you know what, we're going to help you with some of that Z that you can't get to. You still got to do your X stuff, and we're going to help you get to that Z. Their concern was their councils or their officials were going to see GDOT coming in and putting this funding in and say, well, we can take money away from our own transportation group because GDOT is helping them now, when they still needed to get the X done. So there was that concern. And so we worked through those with some of those municipalities to say, okay, let's be very specific about what our memorandums of understanding are and what we're doing. But that was a unique one. That was, we had that in I think 2 different municipalities where that was a concern, that they were going to lose funding from their locals because of this.
And I suspect that you all have almost found the exact opposite, that, you know, from sort of the perspective of, okay, we're going to come in here and provide support and then demonstrate success through that kind of collaborative methodology, has really, Eddie, to your point earlier, sort of been a conduit for innovation and for growth, so that those, you know, sort of TSMO strategies of optimizing and gaining efficiencies have been promoted. And because of that, the funding has been enhanced or gained. Is that a fair way to put it?
I'd have to agree with that.
Yeah.
Go ahead. So I would say that I don't know exactly what budgets the local jurisdictions have and how those have changed over the years, but we haven't had a situation where it's really been, the burden has reverted to GDOT. Like, they still operate and maintain it, but we are here to support them, and we set up these MOUs with the local agencies to make sure that they still understand that they're where their responsibilities are, that we're not coming in and taking away those responsibilities, but hey, we've got these additional resources that you're welcome to use as long as you're collaborating with us about how you're using them, and we're happy to provide it.
Great. And we do have a couple of comments here, questions in the chat. Dennis pointed out how collaboration is key to successful TSMO program, and it should be done at various levels, state, county, local, and I throw in there consultant and vendor and contractors. But, you know, that's another thing we haven't necessarily talked about, but one of the things that I have appreciated since moving to, you know, within the Atlanta area is how well, you know, not only consultants, but also vendors and contractors, and all of us, you know, have that opportunity to work together, which has really just been a very refreshing environment. And then Dennis pointed out as well that he agrees with Eddie that a champion is needed, and also needed as a start, as a catalyst, and that it can be strategic and process-driven to receive sustained funding. Certainly, that is the case. And then we have a question here. Given these models, can the USDOT FHWA serve as an influencer for collaborative thinking as we potentially approach future infrastructure legislation?
No, I take it that
Any
one's
thoughts
for me.
on that? Yeah, I think so too.
I mean, I certainly think so. You know, we have a new secretary, Pete Buttigieg, and he's having internal meetings right now. And one of his big initiatives is breaking down silos and calling for more collaboration. So I think we're certainly going to see that. And honestly, I think that there's a culture of collaboration that exists that I think that will help to, you know, take that initiative and move it forward.
Awesome. Any other thoughts from the rest of the panel on that one? Okay. So I had another question as well. Any other, like, we sort of talked about those primary focus areas of workforce development, and then construction management, and successful traffic signal management through collaboration. But what are some of the other kind of key outcomes that you all have seen as benefits for having kind of a collaboration mechanism in place?
Well, I mean, from our standpoint, I think we've, there are other, you have incidents, you have major incidents that take place that sometimes can have like for example, weather, or even accidents that can have multimodal impacts, and so the collaboration there that works. I mean, I think there was one event that took place perhaps a couple of years ago, right before a holiday weekend, and it took place, right outside the Lincoln Tunnel, which impacted the buses at the Lincoln Tunnel and forced some of those to route through New York City. And by everybody working together, I mean, it wasn't a pretty situation, but but I think it was managed as well as it could.
Yeah, and can you mention the bridge collapse as being one I think is a...
Yeah, and that was actually an early on that, that seems distant now, but that was an early on. We wish we had all the tools we have now when that happened. We had a lot, but we don't. Interesting, Kate had mentioned about, or sorry, I think it was Eddie that mentioned how, GDOT kind of built their ATSPM off the UDOT product, that open source product, and then we stood up the SIGOPS metric site, and the collaboration in that is, now at a point where we are in the process of redeveloping the SIGOPS metric site, which is a consolidation site. It does a lot of different things, but it's a consolidation site of ATSPM data. But every other meeting that we're having right now, Utah DOT is on that call, not just GDOT and the stakeholders, but Utah DOT is on that call. And that's because they're in development on their stuff, we're in development on our stuff, we're sharing ideas. We've done some work with ramp meter metrics and watchdogs for ramp meters. It's a little bit on the outside of the operation side, but in those calls, we have people from Utah DOT, North Carolina DOT, anybody else, Kate, that I'm forgetting? I thought there was another DOT on those calls where they're like, we developed these, the people at NC DOT are like, we developed these metrics, we're using this. I'm like, wow, that's really slick. Did I forget anybody, Kate?
I don't think so. Anybody. I think Utah mentioned some of the folks that they were collaborating with, but they haven't been on our calls.
Okay, yeah. And so you see that's start to spread across as well. And I know GDOT, I get a lot of phone calls from folks in other Kimley-Horn offices or other consultants that are saying, hey, we're talking to these folks in Virginia. Who should they talk to at GDOT? We're talking to these folks over in this state. Who should they talk to at GDOT? And so I know there's a lot of those collaborations and programs that are going on and spreading that out there. The GDOT, when they created their version of the ATSPM, but also now the SIGOPS metric site, that's an open source product that is on GitHub. It is out there for people to use as a base, and we continue to develop on top of it, just the same way that ATSPM was developed by Utah out there on GitHub for people to add branches to whenever they want to. And so that, to me, is a huge amount of collaboration in that whole ATSPM world and realm that GDOT is pushing forward.
So Ken really talked about the collaboration outside of GDOT and outside of Georgia and how that's working, but we also have to establish a lot of collaboration inside Georgia, specifically between our contracts. So we've now established, we currently have 5 contracts that is doing signal operations in Georgia. We've got 2 in the metro Atlanta area and then 3 for the statewide. And we've had to establish these crosstalk meetings for our consultants to sit down together and talk about what they're doing in their areas and problems that they've come up with and how they've solved them, so that we can create that consistency across the state, because we really found that consultants don't like to talk to each other outside of working on these contracts, because they don't want to share trade secrets of what's working in their area. But in order to create consistency across the state, we need them to talk to each other. And if they're not going to do it on their own, then we're happy to set that up. And we have we have quarterly crosstalk meetings for that, and we do quarterly updates with everyone so that everyone's aware of what's going on around the state. And if they see something that's successful up in the north region that they want to apply somewhere else, then they can do that and they can talk to the people that are implementing it and how they've done it. And we've had different software that have been developed by different consultants to manage their region that have been very impressive, and that we've ended up setting up them to expand that to a statewide level so that everyone can use that resource.
Yeah, I'd like to add one thing to this too, because I know during one of our planning calls, I sort of tongue-in-cheek mentioned the song. You know, it's that, and it has a line in it that says "No romance without finance," and I think one of the key benefits to these regional programs and collaboration are the transfer of knowledge about funding and administration and contracting. I've seen conversations between agencies about, you know, how much are you paying for this controller and what does your support contract look like for it? You know, how are you using your federal funding to do maintenance and things like that? So, I mean, those are things that they're intangibles that don't show up in documents, I think, but very much part and parcel to the benefit of regional collaboration.
Yeah, that's a great point. Certainly, in addition to being able to demonstrate success and gain more funding, just the ability to gain knowledge about the funding and how others have managed it and sought out different resources and such. That's a great point. Well, I'll open it up to the panel and see if there's any kind of, if anybody has some final thoughts that you want to share before we close up, but we're getting close to the end. All right, I'll go ahead and wrap up. Well, thank you all so much for participating, and thank you again to the National Operations Center of Excellence for allowing us to host this webinar. And we look forward to meeting with you again in another collaborative environment.
Thank you, Natalie.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.